The night was colder than usual in the Arizona plains. The wind howled across the open land and carried with it the smell of snow and smoke. Inside a small wooden cabin stood a cowboy named Ethan Cole. He had spent the day working with his horses and fixing fences that were falling apart from the last storm. By nightfall, his hands were tired. His face was rough with dust, and his only wish was to rest by the fire. Ethan was a quiet man who lived alone. He had built this small cabin years ago after leaving behind a life that once had love and laughter. His wife had died long ago, and since then he had found comfort only in silence and the open sky. Nights were hard for him, especially the cold ones when the memories came back stronger. The small flame in his fireplace flickered as if it was breathing softly. He sat on the edge of his bed, took off his boots, and rubbed his tired feet. Outside, the storm grew louder. The wind pushed against the door again and again. He got up to check it, pressing the latch tighter, then returned to his bed. Wrapped in a thin blanket, Ethan lay down, watching the shadows of the fire dance on the wooden walls. The sound of the wind made him feel smaller, and his mind drifted toward sleep. Sometime later, he felt something strange. The sound of the door creaked just slightly. At first, he thought it was the wind again. He pulled the blanket closer around him and tried to ignore it. But a few seconds later, he heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. Ethan's eyes opened slowly. He stayed still, his hand resting near the small revolver that hung on a nail beside the bed. But what came next made him freeze in confusion. The mattress behind him moved. Someone, was trying to crawl into his bed. He turned his head, and in the dim light of the dying fire, he saw a shape, small, shaking, and silent. The person was trembling hard, trying to get under the blanket. He could feel the coldness coming from her body, like someone who had been outside in the storm for too long. Ethan didn't move for a moment. His breath caught in his throat. He could see now that it was a woman, her skin dark from the sun, her hair long and black, and her face pale from the cold. Her eyes were closed, her lips were blue, and she was too weak to speak. An Apache woman, he thought, alone, freezing, and half-conscious. She must have wandered through the storm and found the cabin door unlatched. He could see frost on her hair and the edges of her torn shawl. Her small hands were like ice when they touched the blanket. Ethan's heart pounded, unsure what to do. His first thought was to wake her, to make her leave. But he looked closer and saw she wasn't even fully awake. She was barely alive. Her breathing was slow and shallow. Without help, she wouldn't last until morning. He slowly pulled the blanket over her shoulders. She moved closer to the heat of his body without realizing it. Desperate for warmth, Ethan sat up slightly, his back against the wall, watching her face. In the faint light, he could see the marks of exhaustion and cold. She looked too young to have faced this kind of storm alone. The fire was almost gone. He got up carefully and placed another piece of wood into it, keeping an eye on her. The flames rose again, giving a soft glow that painted her features clearly. Her lips moved faintly, whispering something in broken English. He leaned closer and heard her say only one word: warm. He sat back down and stayed awake. Hours passed. He listened to the sound of the wind outside, to her soft breathing beside him. His cabin, once filled with silence, now held the faint rhythm of another life. As dawn approached, the storm began to die. A gray light touched the windows. Ethan's eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he couldn't stop watching her. She stirred slightly, curling under the blanket. When the first light of morning spread across the room, Ethan looked at her again and his breath caught. Around her neck hung a small carved pendant, old and made of dark wood, shaped like a bird with spread wings. His heart stopped for a second. He knew that carving. His wife had owned one exactly like it, from the same Apache tribe that had once helped him years ago. The memory hit him like a sudden wind. Many winters ago, he had been wounded and lost in the mountains after a fall from his horse. It was an Apache family who had found him and cared for him until he recovered. Among them was a young woman who later became his wife. She had died of fever, but before she passed, she had told him about the pendant, a symbol of family and protection. Her people carved them in pairs, one for each sister. Now seeing the same pendant on this stranger's neck made Ethan feel a strange pull inside. Was she connected to his wife's family? Could she be someone from that same village? The thought filled him with something between fear and hope. He leaned closer, careful not to wake her, and touched the edge of the pendant. The wood was warm now from her skin. He looked at her face again and felt something heavy in his chest. Not fear, not suspicion, but something like compassion. The morning sun filled the cabin slowly. He poured some water into a pot and began heating it for tea. The smell of smoke and warmth filled the room. She didn't move for a long time, and when she finally did, she opened her eyes slowly. They were dark brown, deep and cautious. She blinked at him, unsure where she was. Ethan spoke first, softly. "You're safe here," he said. "You came in last night." The storm was bad. She didn't speak right away. She looked around, then at him, then at the fire. Her lips moved as she tried to form words. Her voice came out low and broken. "Cold," she whispered. "And I walked 2 days. Snow everywhere." Ethan nodded. He handed her a cup of warm water. She took it slowly, her hand still shaking. "Drink," he said gently. "You need it." She drank and coughed softly, then looked back at him. There was fear in her eyes, but also trust. A small spark of it. Ethan didn't ask questions. He didn't need to know everything now. He just knew she needed warmth, food, and rest. The hours that followed were quiet. He cooked some beans and bread, offered her a share, and she ate slowly, still weak. Every now and then she glanced at him, as if trying to understand who this man was and why he was helping her. When evening came again, the fire burned stronger. She sat by it, wrapped in a blanket he had given her. The color had returned to her face, and her hair now shone softly in the light. Ethan sat across from her, staring into the flames. He didn't speak much, but his thoughts were loud. The pendant around her neck glowed faintly with the firelight. It seemed like fate had brought her here, as if the storm itself had carried her to his door. That night, as the snow continued to fall outside, Ethan lay awake again. The woman slept peacefully now, her breathing calm. For years he had lived with only silence and memory, but tonight, for the first time, there was something new inside him. The strange feeling that his past and his present had just met again under the same roof. He didn't know who she truly was yet, but he knew one thing for sure. The moment she walked into his life, everything had changed. And as the wind outside whispered softly through the cracks, Ethan Cole stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of story had just begun in that small, lonely cabin. When the woman finally opened her eyes the next morning, the storm had passed. The world outside the cabin was quiet and white. Snow covered everything. The fence posts, the barn roof, even the old trail that led down to the creek. Inside, the fire was still burning, filling the cabin with gentle warmth. Ethan sat by the table, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He looked up when she stirred and gave a small nod. "Morning," he said softly. The woman blinked, her face pale but calm. She sat up slowly, still wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her dark hair hung over her shoulders and her eyes looked around the small cabin, trying to remember how she got there. Ethan spoke gently, not wanting to scare her. "You came in last night. The storm almost took you," he said. "You were half frozen when I found you." She nodded weakly, then pressed her hands together near the fire. "I remember the snow," she said in a low voice. "It was dark. I thought I would die out there." Ethan poured another cup and placed it near her. "Drink," he said. "It will help." She looked at the cup, hesitated, then reached for it. Her hands were small, still red from the cold. She took a sip, then another. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan sat back in his chair. "Name's Ethan Cole," he said. "You're safe here." She looked up at him and spoke softly. "Nayeli," she said. "My name is Nayeli." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was strength in it too. She told him in broken English that she had come from the north with her tribe. Soldiers had chased them away from their winter camp. Many had scattered. She had tried to follow her brother, but lost the trail in the storm. For 2 days she had walked without food or fire. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. When she spoke of her people, there was sadness in her tone, a sadness deeper than the cold outside. He could see that she carried pain not only from the storm but from the world itself. After a moment he stood and took a small pot from the stove. "You need to eat something," he said. He ladled out soup into a bowl and handed it to her. She accepted it carefully, blowing on the hot surface before tasting it. For a few minutes neither of them spoke. The only sound in the cabin was the crackle of the fire. When she finished eating, Ethan asked quietly, "Do you have family nearby?" She looked down at her hands. No, she said softly. They went south. Maybe far. I don't know. Ethan nodded slowly. You can rest here until you're strong again. Then we'll figure out where you need to go. Her eyes lifted to him, full of quiet gratitude. You helped me, she said. Why? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the fire, remembering the long years he had spent alone in this cabin, haunted by silence. Finally, he said, because someone once helped me too. She didn't ask more, but she seemed to understand. Days passed and Nayeli began to recover. Her color returned and her steps grew steadier. She helped around the cabin, washing dishes and sweeping the floor. Ethan noticed she was careful in everything she did, always respectful, never wasting a thing. She often stood by the window, looking out over the snow, her expression far away, as if she was remembering faces she might never see again. At night, when the cold crept back, Ethan added wood to the fire and handed her a blanket. She would thank him in her soft voice, and he would nod, pretending not to notice the way her presence changed the silence of the room. One evening, as the fire burned low, Ethan brought out an old wooden box from under his bed. Inside were a few things he had kept from his past: a locket, a folded letter, and a small carved pendant that looked like a bird with open wings. It was worn smooth from years of being touched. He held it in his hand for a moment, then looked at Nayeli. Around her neck, under her shawl, he had seen the same shape before. His chest tightened. He spoke quietly. That necklace you wear, he said, pointing gently. Where did you get it? She looked surprised and touched it. This, she asked. It was my sister's long ago. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he opened the box and showed her his pendant. It was the same design, the same carving, though a little older and darker. My wife had one like it, he said slowly. Your sister? What was her name? Nayeli's eyes filled with tears. Leia, she whispered. She left our village many years ago. She married a man not of our people. We never saw her again. Ethan's breath caught. He stared at her, his mind spinning. Leia, he said softly, as if the name had been sleeping in his heart all this time. She was my wife. For a long moment the cabin was silent. The only sound was the faint hiss of the fire. Nayeli's eyes widened. You were the man she spoke of, she said slowly. My mother said she went with him, that he was kind. We thought she was gone forever. Ethan looked down at the pendant in his hand. His eyes glistened, not from the smoke, but from the memories that came flooding back. The laughter of the woman he had loved. The promise she made to him under the wide desert sky, and the sickness that took her away too soon. He swallowed hard and looked up again. She was, he said quietly. Gone too soon. Nayeli reached out her hand and touched his arm gently. She was my sister, she said. Now I see why I found this place. The storm brought me here to you. The words hung in the air like something sacred. Ethan didn't know what to say. For years he had believed that part of his life was over, that the world had taken everything from him. But now, sitting across from this young woman, carrying the same blood as the woman he once loved, he felt something deep inside begin to heal. The days that followed were softer. Ethan taught Nayeli how to tend the horses and chop wood. She learned quickly, laughing quietly when he showed her how to use the tools. The sound of her laughter filled the cabin in a way he hadn't heard for years. One morning, they went outside together to check the corral. The snow had begun to melt and sunlight touched the hills. The land looked alive again. Nayeli lifted her face to the light and smiled. Ethan watched her, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun. You'll be able to travel soon, he said. When the road's clear, she turned to him. Maybe, she said softly. But maybe I don't need to leave yet. He didn't answer. He only nodded, understanding more from her tone than her words. That night they sat again by the fire. Nayeli worked on mending an old coat while Ethan cleaned his tools. The firelight danced between them, filling the room with gold and red. After a while, Nayeli looked up and spoke quietly. Your wife. She loved you, she said. I can see it. She always said the man she married was strong, but his heart was gentle. Ethan smiled faintly. She was the strong one, he said. She taught me what kindness means. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Outside, the wind moved softly through the snowdrifts. When it was time to sleep, Nayeli stood and placed another log on the fire. The glow brightened her face. Good night, Ethan, she said softly. Good night, he replied. The next morning, the storm clouds were gone and the world seemed new. Ethan opened the door and stepped outside. The sunlight sparkled on the white land, and he could hear the faint sound of melting snow dripping from the roof. Nayeli came to stand beside him, wrapped in his old blanket. The carved pendant on her chest caught the light, shining like a small flame. Ethan looked out over the open land and then at her. For years he had lived alone, his heart locked away like a room with no door. But now, standing there with her, he felt that door open again. He didn't know what would come next, whether she would stay or go. But he knew this. She had brought warmth back into his world. The same warmth that once saved her life had now saved his heart. And as the sun rose higher over the plains, Ethan Cole smiled for the first time in many winters, knowing that some storms come not to destroy but to guide the lost back home.